Evening. Welcome to the Board Policy Committee meeting for April 17th. Lynn, is the meeting been properly posted?
Yes, it has been.
Yes, it is. And opportunity for citizens to speak to us. There are no citizens out there, so we will assume that's the end of that one. We have some action items tonight and some first reading items tonight to discuss. A couple of action items held over from for need of further information and et cetera. But before, the first action item actually is approval of the policy committee minutes from our March meeting. Moved by Barbara. Thank you, Barbara.
I'll second.
Seconded by Greg. Any questions or changes to the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? None. Thank you. Okay, the next two policies in this list are technology-related policies that we had some further questions to ask before we took them to the next step. So let's take them in order. 7540, Computer Technology Network and Internet Acceptable Use and Safety. A lot of excuse me. A lot of terminology in here came up. I think the questions that were here were dealing with the Technology Advisory Committee and the technology plan for the district. Joe, do you have some further information on that?
We connected with Steve Schloman after the last meeting, and Steve indicated pertaining to the question about the District Technology Committee and the technology plan, he feels that it's a good idea to utilize and expand the SAIL team that they're using to address Waukesha 1. So we have a Waukesha 1 plan that's addressed instructional technology from the instructional benefit acquisition of. So do we add this? Do we take this away? How are we providing professional development? He's looking at expanding that to include students and parents, so broadening that committee to fit the definition of what we have in this policy. We did ask if he wanted that language removed because it's no longer a requirement from the state to have a district technology plan, but he felt that, you know, given some of the questions that come in around technology, it would be good to have that committee and that plan in place, so we'll keep that language.
Okay, so the language as stated in this version.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Everyone in the state
Yeah, certain policies will reflect state laws. Other policies take on more of a local flavor that addresses what the state law requires. So, you know, we are utilizing the Neola Policy Service. All of the policy language is vetted through the Neola attorneys, so everything that we get comes from the Neola attorneys at a national or a state level. So the language in these policies is consistent to the level that it needs to be. There are 1,200 districts, I believe, across the country that utilize Neola. So, you know, some of the policy language that we'll talk about tonight and other policies, it's been drafted by attorneys, it's been vetted by attorneys, it's been utilized in other school districts. It may need a Waukesha twist if it's appropriate, but some of the language just is standard boilerplate policy language. It will have similar language, and some districts don't stay on top of policies the way we do. Some districts utilize a different service to help them. A lot of it is a local decision.
Okay, any other, Joe?
Yeah, Joe, what happens if a student and or a parent doesn't sign the acceptable use?
You have to sign the acceptable use form to have access to the technology.
Have we ever had somebody not?
I did not hear of a time when we did not have somebody do it.
Just curious.
So what you're saying is they just wouldn't have access until that's signed. So that's
Usually what we get, I don't want to say that it's a given. I would never say that. It is almost standard now in schools that kids are going to have to access technology to a varying degree in order to complete something. If it's as simple as a word processed paper that they're submitting, to the research that supported that paper, to having access to platforms where they can collaborate virtually with other schools, places around the world. I mean, you name it, there's a component of technology everywhere. What we get is people sign the form to use technology, but then they request that certain restrictions be put on their child's technology. So the iPad will be locked down to a point where it's only used for classroom purposes. You don't have access to other apps or things like that. So usually we get the signature, but we oftentimes get requests to put some controls on that, which we do.
Good. Barbara? Excuse me. Nothing? Oh, okay. Excuse me, Joe.
Yeah, I've actually had some parents talk me over the years, wishing that there could be more restrictions put on the devices. And I'm just wondering if it would be too much trouble, this isn't a policy thing, but to ask Steve on the form to maybe give what level the parent will sign off at. Just so it's more of an operational thing.
And we could bring that question back to him. To what degree? There are certain controls put on technology based off of elementary, middle, and high school access.
Sure.
If you remember back about a year and a half now, Steve sent out some communication around locking down the app environment. So there used to be the opportunity for kids to use certain chat features and messaging features, and what we had learned was that those features were very distracting in the classroom environment, and they sometimes were problematic for us. So we really put a lot of control on what app is there, and there's a vetting team in place. Some of the Steve's instructional technology folks sit down and approve apps based off of their educational merit now. That is a new process for us within the last year and a half, which has really put some controls on the app. So I'll bring that up to Steve. I would add, to what degree? We're not running into situations where kids are bringing in a laptop computer. They may be, but it's not. The iPad really has been the tool. The iPad has been the tool that the kids are using for their technology. So what we are running into and what we've created is the policy on cell phones and personal communication devices. That's really the area that we feel we need to address. It's not a kid's laptop computer that they're bringing in, or a Chromebook if they're bringing it in. It's more along the lines of what they're doing with their cell phone. And we have policy that addresses that.
Thank you.
Yes, Joe.
I move to approve revisions to policy number 7540, computer technology network and internet acceptable use and safety as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Greg. Further questions on 7540? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? That goes 5-0, Lynn. And that's good. Okay, the next one is also a technology policy that we held back while we looked for more information. 754002. Proposed revisions to this policy included a change in title, web content services and apps, and language added to address, what were OCRs again?
The Office of Civil Rights.
Oh, civil rights issues, okay, that's what that was about. And about accessibility and compliance with the ADA. And we did a little research on this one also?
We did. There was a question that came up, and I believe Joe asked it regarding the idea of the dashboard. When we checked with Richard Zimmern from Neola, and when we talked to Steve Schloman, dashboard falls into the web page category as far as the district goes. It doesn't have a special, in educational environments, it's not having a special meaning. It's just a component of the dashboard or of the web page.
Of the website.
What Steve and I had talked about, though, was that there are layers to those dashboards, and that is just based off of who has access to those layers. So for instance, there are some people who are super users who can get down into every detail on the student because it's part of their job to do that. There is then general information then that would be put out there to the publics, that would show school report card type information, how the school is performing, what the enrollment information is for students at that. I mean, so there's very public, superficial stuff, and then there's very private stuff, and it's just based off of who has access to what.
So the general public would not have access to individual student information and so on?
No, not at all. And there are certain people in the district that don't have certain access to
Right. So then
students.
we have the data analyst type people that
The Steve and the Ally and so on and so
yeah,
forth who really can
they
dig
can
in.
go deep.
Yep,
Yeah, that's by design.
yep.
That was the bulk of the questions on this one, if I recall.
Correct.
Further questions on 754002? Is there a motion for accepting this one, please?
All right, I'll move to accept the revisions to policy number 7540.2, district webpage.
Thank you. Seconded by Amanda. Any other questions? All in favor of the 7540.02 as developed here, please say aye.
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 Opposed? That's also a 5-0 then. Okay, the next one is one that's been here and back and here and back. Dealing with the first paragraph, relations with non-school affiliated groups, and it's gone through a couple different ideas, I guess. The latest one being addressed at the last board meeting had to do with it being a little bit too restrictive on the public use, particularly of the words School District of Waukesha. Therefore, that individuals thought we might be confining or restraining public freedom of speech. So, as I mentioned, and I think I emailed everybody, if not, you have it on your desk, I received a couple emails. The first one is on top is the one that is most relevant to this, where he recommends basically two paragraphs. One in which the state would use the terminology district, if so-and-so are employees of the school district of Waukesha, we have the ability to not permit them to use that unless they have the superintendent's approval. And the second paragraph, which is about the fifth one down for you, which deals with the citizens or groups of citizens that elect to use the district or school's names, et cetera. Basically is not restricted, but the superintendent I lost my place, I'm sorry. Should the superintendent authorize citizens or groups of citizens to use the district's name, logos, et cetera, the superintendent must provide written notice to the Board of Education. Wait, there was something else in there. Oh, if it does not have prior authorization by the superintendent, the district is not supporting or condoning the activities or positions of these citizens and groups. But we're not restricting them at that point from using that terminology, so I guess it's open for discussion at this point. Thoughts?
So the suggestion was more to clarify,
No, the part, yeah, in that first paragraph on the
Right.
policy itself, where we deleted at the previous meeting, we deleted the phrase, any such approval granted for whatever cause or group shall not be construed as an endorsement. And I guess what he felt is we really don't have the right to restrict the public from using our name in a letter or something like that. So it is more specific in that you can restrict your own your own employees, but you can't restrict the citizenry. That's what I think has been tried there. I don't know. Yes, Joe?
I do think we need to restrict citizens. from using our logo, from using our name for a specific purpose to move whatever purpose forward on their behalf if it hasn't been approved by us. So we can maybe talk through examples, and I'll just make up an example. Let's say I want to promote bullying. I want to have people become better bulliers. Okay? Would you want me to develop a website and put our logo on that website? Talking about the school district of Waukesha. Okay, I want to be able to talk about bullying and make better bulliers, make people into better bulliers. I would say we wouldn't want that. Now, it's kind of a stupid example. I'm exaggerating here, okay? But what business would sponsor that? There would be no private business that would want to sponsor that. And we do have some of the same rights as private businesses when it comes to our name. We own our name. We own our logo, and we should have control over how that is used. Now, we can talk about the specific example that actually happened if we'd like. That's a real-life example. There was a parent and or organizations that wanted to promote the march, okay? And they used our logo and they used our district in a manner that presented us as sponsoring that event. And then there were other organizations that also sponsored that too. And they were from politically oriented organizations. And we did not feel that we should be associated with that. It wasn't something that we sponsored, that we started. Now, what we have to talk about is were we, and then what we did is we asked them to stop using our logo and our name in that manner and take it off the website. We put forth a pretty strong letter asking them to do that, okay? So we didn't tell them to stop, to not talk about it. They still have the right to talk about it. They still have the right to organize. All we asked was for them to take our name off of it and our logo off of it because we didn't sponsor that. So when we're talking about this, let's be absolutely clear that this policy in no way restricts people's First Amendment rights. What we're talking about is the proper use of our name, which we own. And I think that the way it's written, the last time we went over it is what I'm comfortable with, at least.
Other views? Or same view? It's interesting, I had some of those thoughts too, particularly as relevant to the school's names, logos, specifics. When board member Kurt was talking about this, I can understand somebody writing in the paper and referencing the school district of Waukesha, but I see that as different from using the school district of Waukesha as kind of support. Joel?
I was just going to just point everybody to the language. I mean, you go through the first sentence of it and you get to the point where it says, are not to be used for advertising or promoting the interests of any non-school related agency or organization, public or private, without the approval of the superintendent or its designated representative. That you're talking about promotion and advertising. Yep. You're not talking about things that fall in the general range of speech, which could be a criticism or a support of what the district is doing, a comment in speech or in writing about the school district of Waukesha. It focuses on promoting and advertising, which gets down to the point that Joe was talking about earlier about a pro-bully group or the situation that we dealt with the march.
Okay. And there's a difference too. I felt that same difference. And I'm not too sure if, I was just going to read this again. Well, this statement is a little bit softer because he's basically saying, go ahead and do it, but we're just not supporting you in doing it, whereas the statement we have it in the policy is more restrictive. Okay?
I don't see a difference between employees and other people in the public. So I think what was
Well-
being recommended was we have one, we're a little bit more strict with employees and less strict with the public. I don't really see a difference personally.
Well, if you took it the way he was doing it, he was simply saying, we can restrict the employees. We are not supposed to be restricting the citizenry.
No,
That's the way that's why he put it in two different paragraphs. This one is all inclusive. The way I try to read it too, so. Amanda, you have an issue? Please.
No, I don't have an issue. I agree with Joe, or Mr. Como here. The school district is a public entity, but the citizens also did elect the board to run and to protect the school district. So I think that we do have the right to say, you can't use our name for certain things, and it's very specific, promoting and advertising. So I agree with how it's written here.
The way it exists.
So how
after
it is
we've deleted-
presented here in
Okay.
policy 9700.
Okay. Any other wishes, Greg?
I do think that some groups maybe have done so unintentionally, not with a goal in mind. I mean, maybe they just put it in there. I mean, maybe they weren't aware of the policy. So I guess I wouldn't assume that every group that uses it is using it for the wrong reasons, but I guess I agree with the rest of you that, based on what I'm reading here, it limits it to specifically advertising and promoting. I don't think it restricts free speech.
Okay. Maybe we should underline those words when we print them. Because that's where a lot of the reason falls.
Joe, does this
Gotta know
come up
that.
a lot? I mean, or is this,
No.
It,
I mean, it doesn't seem
it came
like
up
it
recently
has.
it came up recently as it pertained to the March.
Right, but outside
But
of
you run
that-
you run the potential of it coming up. I mean, in anything that is, we've in the March board meeting, and I believe last week at the April board meeting, there was a group that came petitioning the board for a resolution on being anti-assault weapon. You get political movements that you get some citizens that are for it, some citizens that are against it. Those groups could try to get the likeness of the school district of Waukesha to side with them. We want to be able to control what we would endorse, how our name would be used to endorse it. There's a private business in town that may be doing great things for kids. If you say yes to them and you don't put any controls on it, you may run into a situation where there's a group that would be not in favor of doing, wonderful things for kids, and they may want to use our logo for that. So you have to have something in place that controls the promoting and advertising. We may get a lot of requests one year, we may get very few requests the next. It's important to have it in place.
So far, I'm not getting a sense for modifying this to differ it from what we had at the last board meeting.
That's true.
Nobody's moving in that direction? Then I would be bringing it back to the board meeting in May as written. Do we require a vote on that then, Lynn?
No changes were made, so I don't think there's any action tonight, and it
We
would,
could take action on it,
You
though.
could take
We
action
could
on
simply
it.
take action that was supported.
Then
As
it would
is.
be slated for approval at the May meeting.
Okay,
Been there twice already.
then, the way I would like to take this is that we did discuss it, be to leave it this way. Motion to do it in that direction.
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Como.
Second.
Seconded by Barbara. Any further questions or discussion? And all in favor of accepting it and moving forward with it as presented at the last meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0 on that one, Lynn. Dan, thank you guys for your discussion. I'll be anticipating your support at the meeting. Okay, now we have a group of 6 or 7 or 8, didn't count them, revisions and a couple new policies that have come to us through the Neola channels. And the first of these is 5136, personal communication devices other than cellular phones. Added an opening sentence of this policy, definition of personal communication devices was included after option A had been deleted. Oh, this is, we had choices on this one, didn't we? Joe, you want to give us a little bit of a rundown on what's the deal here? It just looks like that one thing, really.
Yeah, we're looking at, just making sure that if you have technology, the technology is being used for educational purposes, and that it prohibits, Barb asked a question earlier about other technologies, that we're prohibiting the use of technologies in our schools for non-educational
Okay,
related
and that's
purposes. And then you see that.
right about in
that
the
box
middle
is
of the
checked.
first page.
Correct.
That's the one we selected, right?
Yep.
Everything else becomes, oh, there is some terminology on other things, but. Questions? Okay, then I will seek a motion for approval of 51,
36.
wait a minute. Help me, Lynn? Okay, this is for us to take action to bring it to a first reading in May. I
Correct.
constantly have to think about which way we're doing.
Yes.
Okay, so is there a motion to accept it as 5136 as developed here and bring to a first reading in May?
So moved.
Moved by Barbara,
Second.
seconded by Amanda. Any questions? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? 5-0, Lynn.
You?
And 5136.02, cellular telephones in the classroom. Show the synopsis on this one.
We have added just a little bit of language to make sure that you see, including sexual orientation and
Yep.
transgender identity, that is added to the non-discrimination piece as it pertains to bullying and other forms of aggressive behavior. You see that bottom paragraph. We've added on school buses or other board-approved vehicles, as we do transport students on a regular basis. And we did add classrooms and gymnasiums as areas where you can't record other individuals.
Oh, yes.
There are, if you watch the news, you'll see at least once a week, classroom or gym cell phone video that, oftentimes is very embarrassing to the person who has been videoed. We want to make sure that we include that you can't record those individuals for purposes such as that in this policy.
Okay. Pretty straightforward. Any questions on this one? Then let's have a motion on 5136.02.
I'll move to approve the revisions to 5136.02.
Okay, Greg, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Barbara. Any questions? All in favor of accepting 5136.02, cellular phones in classrooms? Wonder if we should change that title. Well, the title specifically is about classroom. Should we just say "and other" or something like that?
We did add this policy in a little while back, for a lot of discussion, because we were talking about the classroom issues.
Oh,
In any learning environment, even the gym, the locker room, I mean, anything could potentially be a classroom if it's
Okay.
an instructional type space. So that's why, it stays
Get
as
that way.
classroom.
that's easier. Let's just do that. Yes, Barbara?
What about, the football stadium or where they play baseball or?
If I have a class sitting in the bleachers there and I'm teaching them, that's my classroom for the day.
Okay.
If it is a baseball game, and they're sitting there, it's no longer a classroom.
So when we have,
Really, classroom is defined by the instruction that is going
okay,
on.
so when we have football games, that's not a classroom.
Correct,
Right.
that's,
I didn't think so. Okay.
Joe?
What about field trips? Classroom is wherever they're at, the
classroom
museum?
classroom, if the museum is there, if it's a school-related, we do address school-sponsored and school-related activities in policy.
We're talking about riding on a school bus to the museum.
Correct. We do have the bus travel. We do have a pretty extensive field trip policy as well. We didn't add the cell phone language to the field trip, but we do make very clear that that the field trip is an extension of the classroom experience.
Consistent then, good. Okay, we already had the motion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0, Lynn.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another 5136.01, electronic equipment. Again, some terminology changes. Oh, we got a whole big change in this one. We added a whole chunk, didn't we?
Oh, my gosh. Yes.
And a synopsis, what are we doing here, Joe?
We're saying that you can't use your technology to bully,
Yep.
or harass, or to injure either physically or emotionally another person. And so you see a lot of that green in there addresses inappropriate use of technology and the steps that administration will take and the locations where that type of behavior is prohibited.
And we have an X for a selection on the bottom, but what was it selected
It
against?
carries over to the other page. If technology, resources, other electronic equipment is confiscated, it will be released, returned to the student's parent or guardian after the student complies with any other disciplinary consequences that are imposed. Any technology, resources, or other electronic equipment or device confiscated by the district staff will be marked in a removable manner with the student's name and held in a secure location in the building's central office until it is retrieved by the parent or the guardian.
So this is what was either a select or don't select
Correct.
on this one, okay. It's not a either or. Barbara?
There's been times where parents don't come and get whatever it is that was confiscated. So what do we do with that
It
stuff?
stays there until
Yeah.
somebody shows up and picks it up.
And if they don't pick it up, it just stays in the
It
building?
stays there until it's,
That's what I used to do.
Greg first, please.
Joe, how are parents and students informed of a policy like this?
this is put in the student handbooks
Okay.
that the parents sign off on. Policy updates that do pertain to parents, the significant policy updates that would pertain to parents and students are direct email across the district.
That's what I thought.
This has been a standard practice that is finally being captured in policy now.
Cuomo?
Thank you.
Yeah, just a couple of things. One, did this verbiage come from or go through our Neola attorney?
Yes, it did.
Okay. So it is similar to what they're recommending for other districts. The second paragraph from the bottom, unauthorized technology resources and other electronic equipment and devices will be confiscated from the student by school personnel. Is that specific enough, or should we say school district personnel? Because it might not just, it could be someone from central office, not from the school. I might be splitting hairs here, but,
I guess it would.
or is it
It would be
broad?
a,
Is-
it would be a
is that-
highly unlikely situation where a district office administrator would be doing the confiscation. It would be most appropriate and based off of our student discipline policies, that would be an assistant principal, a principal, a dean, even a teacher would be involved in the, Joe's using his cell phone inappropriately, give me the cell phone, I'm gonna turn this into the principal, and then
Sure.
the principal has it. So it would be school personnel 99.9%.
That's a broad enough stroke,
yeah.
so, okay,
Yeah.
okay. And then I just had, I don't know how I feel on this, but in the second paragraph, the very first dark green paragraph, the 4th sentence down, we're talking about, it says, well, maybe I should just read the whole sentence. Further, at no time may any technology, resource, or other electronic equipment / device be utilized by a student in a way that might reasonably create in the mind of another person an impression of being threatened, humiliated, harassed, embarrassed, or intimidated. And I know just over the course of the years, some words are harder to prove or not prove, and we've tried to avoid words like impression in the past. And I just don't, I guess I'm looking for feedback from my fellow committee members on,
Subjective,
yeah, it's subjective and
hard to enforce or hard to measure.
yeah, and yeah, so I'm struggling with the word impression a little
Right,
bit.
I agree.
As somebody who has had to investigate numerous bullying complaints at school levels when I was working as an assistant principal and when I was working in some of my prior districts where I had direct contact with students in these situations, I would get the person who was the bully would say, well, come on, I was just giving him a hard time. But the victim of it took it as this is this is bullying, this is harassment. And so by using the word impression there, you can get down into what a reasonable person would believe is bullying or harassing behavior. Every day if I come up to you and I snap a picture at the side of your head while you're trying to do work, that creates a pattern that anybody, that is the impression piece. I should know that this could potentially be taken as bullying. So that's where the impression word comes into this, having investigated these things before. Somebody would say that they're just messing around. Well, just messing around to one person could create the impression that it is bullying and harassing to somebody else. That allows us, when we communicate this policy through the handbook to the students, to make clear that we're not saying that you need to have a pattern there, but you need to think before you do.
Okay, I see where you're getting at. It's it's how the person that's the victim, how they're interpreting things, and obviously there's different ways to interpret things, and we're leaning towards, what the victim's thoughts are there.
Correct, and any of these complaints then would be investigated through the anti-bullying policy.
Right.
So if it was, something where, I felt like I was being bullied, I would report that to my administration. My administration would pull out the bullying policy to determine if it was bullying or not. But nonetheless, whether it was bullying or not bullying, the person who was doing the behavior, the perpetrator, would be then still subject to discipline because what they were doing could be perceived as. It gives the impression.
Actually, as we talk through it, I actually like the word impression there right now. So that helped me. I think we should keep that word there, actually.
But it doesn't automatically assume that the person that has that impression is correct.
Correct. Correct. And so that could be, that's where you tease out the claim that I was being bullied, because of the picture or because of something that was in social media or technology. You make the claim, but then we go to the policy to investigate it. And that's, our administration has been drilled through 2 formal professional development opportunities plus email reminders saying, in a situation where somebody says that they were bullied, go to the policy, follow the steps in the policy, and then you can get to a determination.
Okay,
Okay.
I don't think we have a motion on this one yet, do we? So if somebody would move for the accepting.
All right, I will.
Barbara, 5136.01.
Right.
I'll second.
Further further questions? In favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? 5-0, Lynn. Okay, that was, okay, now we're at 753002. This was part of the technology group that we carried back, staff use of personal communication devices. Were we holding this, or were we waiting out for Steve on something on this one, Joe, do you remember? It just got to it now, that's, okay. So this one, oh. Just to have the driving in it? Yeah,
Does address the,
yeah.
driving,
Option A
yes.
has some of the driving stuff in it, yeah.
But it's different from the one that we looked at before, wasn't it?
It's different.
8605, was that the one
Yes,
that we had the question at the board meeting?
board-owned and operated vehicles, that was, yeah, that was the one we had, we'll have it down below here for taking it back for the approval at the next board meeting. Do we have something that's specifically different between these two? Or just one supporting the other?
one does support the other, and I'm refreshing my memory. I believe that this was the situation where we talked about making every effort to use hands-free communication. And this also does address, I believe, the idea, the old policy said receive text messages. The updated language talks about reading text
Reading them.
messages, because you don't have control over getting them, but you have control over reading them while you're driving. It also eliminates outdated technology like beepers and pagers, which was in policy language.
Then the other one had the words highway deleted too, if you remember, that was part, that was a big part.
Correct.
of it.
Highway was a confusing term.
Confusing term that we wanted out of there.
But that is policy 8605.
Yeah. So any issues on 7530.02? Most of this was just there. There's a hands-free is about 2/3 of the way down the page. Which is becoming more and more.
I think these are conflicting. So if we look at, if you bring out
Yeah?
8605, in 8605, we say personal communication devices, which include earpieces, earbuds, headsets, and/or Bluetooth, shall not be used for sending or reading text messages or sending or reading emails. Okay. It's not talking about phone calls. So phone calls are okay with wireless, with like a Bluetooth, but not emails and not text.
Text messages, yeah.
Okay. I thought it also included
No,
phone calls.
the 7530 does, right?
Right.
7530 also addresses, it's not as specific to, if you're driving, I'm thinking of, staff that drive district vehicles, our maintenance folks and such, where they're assigned a district vehicle to use, our maintenance guys with the pickup trucks and the vans and such. That's really where policy 8605 is a little bit more controlling. Policy 7530.02 really talks about anybody who's got to drive around. We're a large district, we've got staff that are shared, they may or may not need to use their cell phones over the course of the school day. This policy addresses those folks who are using a personalized vehicle, maybe getting a mileage stipend for what it is that they're doing, and still have to use their phones over the course of their duties.
Whereas the other one is
You're driving a district vehicle, so we're
board
gonna
vehicle, or, yeah, a district
put more
vehicle,
control
yeah.
on you.
Okay. 753002, okay, is comfortable with it? We have to have a motion to accept it, wait, yeah, accept it. Bill,
I'll move to approve revisions to policy 7530.02, staff use of personal communication devices.
seconded by
I'll second.
Greg. Questions? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? 5-0, Lynn. Brings us to a new policy. And let me get this out of the way. This is an interesting one. Continuity of organizational operations plans. This is a policy. Now, is this one that we are accepting the way Neola put it together, or is this our work, or what, Joe?
This is a recommended policy by Neola. It is just a recommended policy. It's not anything that you have to have, but as we read through it, as I read through it, it makes good sense to think about and create a plan that addresses these things. You think about, a few years back, I believe, when North was on fire, had the whole North building burned down, we would have been faced with a huge dilemma as to how do we educate those kids for the remainder of a school year, if the school was completely lost. Think of one of our elementary school locations. If a fire broke out at an elementary location, think about other situations. You do see situations where there are shootings in the media, and sometimes those happen at public events. What would happen if that happened when a group of central office administrators were together and you were to lose essentially the executive cabinet, even a car accident or something tragic? Really trying to think through scenario by scenario, making sure that organizational hierarchies exist, make sure that you would have plans where there is space available to educate students in as quick of a manner as possible. We do have our crisis response plan for the district, and that's very good in the moment. Those steps address the incident. You have to evacuate a school. We have procedures to help us when we evacuate a school. You have to deal with crisis in the school environment. Those steps help us deal with those things. But once those are done, you have to have plans and processes in place for the next day, the day after that. And so really this continuity of organizational operations addresses that. We don't have this plan, but if the board chooses to approve this would be work that we would do over the course of the summer, where we would create a plan that would address as many possible scenarios as we could think of.
Joe discussed this with me previously. It sounded like a pretty serious, pretty important thing to do.
Yeah,
In my mind.
It is.
right.
Governmental organizations, they often have got a first in charge, second in charge. You think of the State of the Union address, they've got those folks that are tucked off somewhere, not at the State of the Union. Not putting the school board at the same level as the full Congress. However, you should be.
Glad you didn't do that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you should be, we as an organization should be thinking along those lines, because there are certain functions, if we missed a policy update, that wouldn't be that big of a deal, but if something were to happen to the vast majority of the board, right before we needed to pass a budget, what rules are in place and what steps are in place to address it around when you set the revenue limit. So there are some critical timing pieces that a Board of Education must operate on.
Right,
I think that all of that would get talked about within the scope
Another
of this
interesting
plan.
example, yeah. Joe?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I do support this. Looking at the last paragraph, it says the superintendent shall recommend the COOP for the Board of Education review and approval. And I would think we might want to put timing into there. How often should we do that? Is that once a year? Is that at every other year? Is that once every 3 years? As opposed to just leaving it up to whoever's going to determine to do that whenever. And I know I won't remember to ask the superintendent where that is.
And so the next line in there, the superintendent shall conduct, you know, we selected a periodic review. If we wanted to, we said it, you know, periodic could be every year, it could be every 2 years, whatever it is. If we wanted to designate a frequency, we have to review by statute our crisis response plan formally every 5 years. We did that 2 weeks ago, and we're going to the safety committee tomorrow with it. We could put this on a 5-year rotation or on a 3-year rotation. I think it's beneficial to do that. I think it would be beneficial when you think of how the board runs on 2 types of calendars, you know, the July 1 to June 30th calendar, but there are some things that boards have to address that are January 1 to December 30. Those, you know, we may want to just pick a date in there.
Could we say, the periodic is too vague for me, too. I mean, that could be 10, 15 years if they wanted to do it. But let's say not to exceed, periodic review not to exceed 3 years or something like that. That's just when it comes possible. I mean, I don't know that it has to be annual, but I would not want it to go on forever.
Yeah. I'd be in favor of like a 3-year.
3 years?
Yeah, and just because it's new, 3 might be better as opposed to 5. But, you know, we
Yeah.
could change it at a later
Anytime, yeah.
date,
Change it,
but
yeah.
Can you change that then, Lynn?
So I could have it read, the superintendent shall conduct a review of the COOP every 3 years?
at least once every 3 years.
At least
3
once?
years.
At least once every 3 years would be better. At least once every, because maybe that first year out, we're gonna try it in a year.
Yeah.
And it gives us the latitude to work with that. I
Well, would we add, or as needed?
think that,
Because, you know, once every 3 years, but we might need it sooner than that.
I think it says at least, right?
the at least covers that, I think.
Superintendent shall conduct a review of the COOP at least once
Oh, you have
every
at
3
least there.
years.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed the at least. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, there are motion then to accept policy 8. I lost my place, 8300.
I move to accept new policy number 8300, continuity of organizational operational plans as presented.
As, yeah, because we've just presented it that way.
I'll second.
Seconded by Greg. Questions?
I
Please say-
had
yes, Joe,
one
I'm
very
sorry.
minor change. After the first paragraph, the word scope of continuity plan, I think needs just a line between.
Oh, space.
Yeah.
Yeah, an extra line.
I did correct it
So,
online, so
small-
you're
small
absolutely
thing.
correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right.
Great. Space. All
That
in
was
fa-
it.
Yes. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? 5-0. And information security, and 8305. Reference to definitions in bylaw 1, second paragraph, determines 3. Oh, okay. Deals with all of us being aware of what the policies are relative to maintaining it, and protocols where students shall set forth the internal controls. Anything else, Joe?
This designates the chief information officer, if you look
That's what we use in our district, right?
it's our title for Steve.
Yeah.
And then if you look on the second page, the last paragraph, a periodic assessment of the risk related to the access to and security of the data information collected and retained by the district, as well as the viability of the continuity of organizational operations plan developed pursuant to policy 8300. So this language addresses the policy that we just discussed, and it talks about the periodic review of our data security.
Questions or comments on this one? Okay, Joe?
Yeah, I had a few. The types of data, confidential, controlled, and published, are those commonly used? Are those defined by the state, by the federal government? Where did those types come from, I guess? And are there more types, or are there only those three types? And that's in the first paragraph.
Oh, you mean who defined those?
Yeah, I'm
Made up those
just,
three
yeah, I'm
terms?
wondering where those types came from, and does that really cover everything? I think it does.
From a practical standpoint, you have confidential data that would be on students or employees that would never get released. You've got controlled data that may get released or may not get released. That data would have to have a purpose for release. And then published data, on my mind, goes right to the student directory data that's listed in our student records as an example, or the staff members' names, based off of the school and the grade level that they teach at. Those would be just three examples of what would be confidential student assessment information, enrollment records that would include details of address and telephone. That would be confidential. Controlled data would be data that may be released as part of participation in something. So you have your athletic roster that may include height, weight of an athlete. Published data then would be what we see on all of our schools, where you've got the staff roster, what they teach and where they're at. Those would be, I couldn't think of anything that would go beyond that. I don't know where that term came from outside of the people from Neola, the lawyers from Neola that drafted this policy.
Okay.
Okay.
Couple other things. In the third paragraph, we're talking about that people are required to certify annually that they will comply with the established information security protocols in this policy. That includes board members, administrators, and all district staff members. So we haven't done this before, right?
That's just the confidential data, that sentence, I think. Further, all individuals granted access to confidential data information retained by the district must certify annually that they will comply. I don't know.
No, I think so it starts out, individuals who are granted access to data / information
Oh, I was
collected and retained by the district must follow established procedures so that the information is protected and preserved. Board members, administrators, and all district staff members, as well as contractors, vendors, and their employees granted access to data / information retained by the district are required to certify annually. So I'm thinking we need to have a form essentially signed by virtually everyone who works for the district, who is an elected official, and then also any vendors that provide services to us. And that's pretty similar to the private sector. Non-disclosure agreements is typically what are signed, NDAs, in the private sector. So when my company starts to do some work for another company, quite frequently we sign a non-disclosure agreement saying that anything that we talk about in this project stays amongst us. And I think it's analogous to what's done in the private sector there. So that's a pretty big, that's a pretty big undertaking. So
From a district, we have certain policies that all staff must review and sign off on annually. Those are maintained at the school, distributed through human resources. So this would be the addition of a checklist or a document that the staff would have to sign. So from a scope perspective, we already have a mechanism in place to address it with our staff, our administration and such. Vendors would be a new frontier. I believe we have those arrangements built into the contracts that we sign with vendors. We would have to make them aware of what our policies are, as it lays out here. And the Board of Education would be a new limited though in membership to 9 members, where you would have, the same requirement to sign off that you have reviewed these. And so that's,
It probably should be right after the elections are held. And then, there'd be three new board members, and then six would also have to sign the same document.
It's a good idea.
And then vendors, we go through a vendor selection process, and then I think eventually there's a vendor approval process. During that vendor approval process, that's normally when I think that would slide in, so, okay. And then I had, on the back page, it talks about failure to adhere to the policy. In the second sentence, it says employees who violate this policy, it addresses them. And it talks about students in the next paragraph, or next sentence, what happens if they violate it. And then they talk about contractors and vendors, and then they talk about parents. They never talk about board members. And we're signing in on this, and I think vendors were in there, right?
vendors are in there.
Yeah. So I hate to add us, but
Well, I think you should.
I think we need to add us as,
And there is a bylaw that talks about the removal of a board member. It is a very involved process, though, to remove and recall a board member.
oh, and I'm not necessarily even saying that that's what it should be, but maybe it's up to that.
Yeah, and that'd be the equivalent to when you look at, employees could be disciplined up to employment, termination of employment, students up to and including expulsion.
Sure, I guess
Contractors,
that would be
losing
the
their
equivalent.
contract, and parents being prohibited from accessing district technology resources. So the equivalent for a board member would be,
Up to and including recall. Okay,
or whatever steps that
Sure.
guideline or that
Couldn't we
bylaw
just refer
would.
to the bylaw?
You'd have to make the reference to the bylaw, and Lynn could do that. There are certain ethical standards that board members must, adhere to. This would violate that, and then steps for,
Joe's right, I think we should build that in there.
we're not special. Oh, we aren't. We're individuals.
Okay.
That's a good point.
Anything else on 83? You got any more, Joe?
I did have one more. Sorry. Is periodic okay, I guess? Or do we want to define that as we did similarly, once every 3, if we don't want to do it annually, which I'm fine with not reviewing this annually, this could be every 5 years.
So you're talking about the last sentence?
Yeah, so
Okay.
if we say something,
I'd go with 5 years. I don't like periodic, it just,
use
It
the
doesn't say anything.
verbiage
Right.
that Lynn had suggested for the last policy. A periodic assessment, at least once every five
this
or
time
3.
it's 5.
saying 5 for this one?
I'm suggesting, 5 is, I'm comfortable with that. I mean,
Fine.
It's a good idea.
Okay, anything else on 8305? I'll entertain a motion then for approving 8305 as we've been adjusting it.
so moved?
Moved by Joel, seconded by Amanda. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Now, we have one more revision, 8500. Food services, references to the USDA, smart snacks, nutrition information, alternative meals, bad debt, and negative account balances. This has got a mouthful on it, Joel.
It does. And it is
No
Well, that was a
intended.
pun, I'm sorry.
it's a big deal.
Okay, what are you gonna tell us, Joel?
A lot of this language is as a result of the changes from the USDA.
Okay, I thought so, yeah.
Particular, though, to the discussions that we've had as a district, the idea of bad debt, and collections, that is listed, under, it would be the second page of the policy, the second text page. Bad debt incurred through the inability to collect lunch payment from students is not an allowable cost chargeable. So they start talking about the delinquent, funds that we have, just to make the board mindful of that. The USDA watches out over, what delinquent funds we have, as it pertains to student accounts. So then you get onto the second page there, and I just want to draw your attention to this. Students will be permitted to purchase meals from the district's food service using either cash on hand or a food service account. Student may be allowed to incur a negative, food service balance subject to the following conditions. They will be, it's up to the superintendent. The superintendent shall determine the manner of determining permissible account balances, so there'll be guidelines for this. A student shall not be permitted to purchase à la carte items without sufficient account balance or cash on hand. So we'll provide a lunch, but you can't get the extras if you don't have money in your account or you don't have cash to pay for it.
And the lunch is different.
Yes, and your lunch is different. Well, if you have, I'm just gonna grab a dollar amount, $3.50 in your account. You can go to the line and you can get the regular lunch for $3.50. You cannot go through the à la carte line and grab $5 worth of stuff to make up your lunch. You can get the lunch for $3.50. Your account is at zero. Anything over that would be delinquent, and Todd will, work with Darren on creating a guideline to associate it with this. The next line, though, if I may, an elementary or middle school student that has exceeded the permissible negative balance amounts in his or her account and does not have cash on hand sufficient to purchase a meal will be provided in charge for an alternative meal. And I think, Barb, this is what you were getting at. At the elementary and middle level, subject to USDA guidelines, superintendent shall, in coordination with the district's food service, assure that any alternative meals provided to students receiving paid or reduced price meals that is either claimed for reimbursement or charged to the student account meets the requisite USDA guidelines. This policy and any implementing guidelines shall be provided in writing to all households at the start of the year. So we're going to notify them. The policy and guidelines will be posted to the district website. We are specific, if you remember back a year when we got into the discussion around the collection of funds. We've had some situations this past year where the students do have, and this is particular to the high school level, they've exceeded their balance, and we're now in a situation where they, in spite of being reminded, both the student and the parent, they're not paying their balances with us, even for lunch. So we're going to run into that situation around collecting of student fees. That's why you don't see high school on here as far as getting an alternate meal.
Okay.
I just want to bring that to the attention of the committee because I know that last year we discussed the collection of fees over several months and, making sure that we're working with families who need assistance. We provide free and reduced lunch. We are willing to work with anybody as far as payment plans and such go. But at some point, account balances need to be squared up. F&F has discussed student fees and the collection of student fees, which has been their realm, so.
And if they don't, then they don't get anything to eat.
At the high school level, at the elementary and the middle level, we do provide them the food. At the high school level, there's not an alternative lunch provided, and that's what you see. I want it to sound like we're trying to slip something in there. I want to make you abundantly aware of what you're looking at as a committee. This has been thoroughly reviewed by the business office, and this is their best recommendation that they can make to, one, address the finances, but then also make sure that we're providing to our students what it is that they need.
Is this a common practice among other school districts?
It is very common.
Pardon me?
It is a very common practice.
Very common.
Many school districts don't even address this at the elementary and middle level. This is very generous to students. Some districts don't even provide that.
And we are responsible for that money because the USDA wants.
Oh, absolutely.
And I mean, at the end of the year, we've provided the lunches, and it has to be accounted for.
Right.
We do get reimbursement for students who are on free and reduced lunch.
Yes.
we comply with the rules to assist students on free and reduced lunch. There are situations though where students don't have don't qualify for free and reduced lunch, and they're running.
Still in a situation, yeah. Barbara?
So
Go ahead.
just want to make sure that the policy addresses the normal expectation that we have, and we do work with students and families when it comes down to exceptions. We don't want to write the policy for exceptions, we want to write it for the.
I guess I'm looking at page 3. The top of the page says option number 2, and I'm looking at the paragraph way at the bottom, where they're talking about dietary guidelines for Americans and the USDA Smart Snacks and School Nutrition Guidelines, and may only be sold in accordance with the board policy 8550. Well, you know, it's not uncommon for kids to bring birthday treats. Not necessarily, healthy eating, but yet that we allow them, I guess, we still allow them to be served.
Yeah, but they're not being served by the district's food service program.
they're not, no.
And that's what this addresses. It
Okay.
addresses the food service
Okay,
program.
thank you. So we don't want to discourage that, or,
There are some schools that through their PTO and they've discussed making sure that the snacks are healthy. Some schools have launched that 2 years ago, I think, at the Teaching and Learning Committee. Summit View presented on their Smart Snack program, which seems to be very popular at the school. We have had some schools that have had parent discussions on it, and it's not been as well received. We leave that decision up to the school.
okay, thank you, good idea.
Yeah, going back to the first page, and first of all, just a general comment. This is a lot of stuff to try and balance, and to be fair to everybody, and to meet the federal government's requirements. It's mind-boggling, and I'm wondering what's driving the fourth paragraph, saying that the board shall approve and implement nutritional standards, and then it goes on for 3 paragraphs, and it lists a whole bunch of things that we have to do as a board. Is that following the federal regulations that the board is required? Because I don't know if we do all these things right now.
And that's why this is new, and this does meet what the federal requirement is, and the federal requirement follows the federal food service dollars. So there's a chain there, and this language allows us to be in compliance with the USDA.
So, I mean, we're approving the nutritional standards, the types of food and beverages that may be sold on the premises, the time and the place, and the type of the food that can be sold. We're also having to consider the nutritional value of the food and beverage. So we will need to be informed of a whole bunch more information. Periodically, when we go out and we bid out our food contract, we'll get into certain aspects that will dive deep into some of these topics, but not on a regular basis. And this seems like this would be an annual thing or an ongoing thing, maybe even. So it's
Our vendor would have to present this to us, wouldn't it?
Sure.
How we're
They're
being,
gonna meet
because when we hire them,
Aramark has a dietitian working with the district. They have a food service manager working with the district. As an organization, I mean, this is the bread and butter of their organization. I mean, they are on top of all of these things. They have the information that should be presented to you. It's a matter of getting that in front of you for a presentation, which I would venture to guess would probably go through the F&F committee to start because of the connection with the contract and in those areas. It'd start in F&F, and then a general report would be provided to the whole board.
So depend on our vendor for that.
Joe, I'm wondering if in that communication that you called attention to, if the word sold is the key word. What do you think? Sold is different than kids bringing treats or
Yeah.
et cetera.
Yeah.
Or the PTO buying popsicles for everybody in the
Right.
building. So I would think sold maybe is the key word. What do you think?
Yeah, I think from a control perspective, that would
Yeah.
make sense.
And this policy doesn't address at all snacks. This really addresses the food service programs, and to put in birthday treats and, teacher-delivered snacks.
Right.
We would be, we would be
There's
trying
no
to
end.
capture the kitchen sink with this
That's right.
policy.
There's no end.
I'd recommend to the committee that we just focus on the food service
I would
program with
agree.
this.
Would that include vending machines? This?
It would be anything that would really address the lunch time during the day. The vending machine question, unless it's specifically spelled out in here. Because if you look, just for instance, the middle of the last page, just above the area, it says, "No food or beverage other than those associated with the district's food service program are to be sold during food service hours."
Sold.
And food service hours are the breakfast time and the lunch period during our days. The cafe situation that you may be running, at the end of the school day, or something that kids could stop at between hours, something that would be on during a passing time, that's not food service
right.
hours. You're not,
That's right.
what you're not allowing is any competition in the school with the food service program.
Okay, that was a heavy, Joe?
I move to approve 8,500 food services as presented.
You?
Second.
Seconded by Barbara. More questions? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? 5-0 passes. That concludes the action items. Very quickly, we had policies that we read at the April board meeting. I'll just mention which ones they were. 7540.01, technology privacy. We had no incident involving changes to that. 7540.03, student education technology acceptable use and safety. That went through okay at the first reading. 7540.04, staff education technology and acceptable use and safety. Also went through at the April meeting without any serious questions. 7540.07, district issued student, wait a minute, did I miss one? I did. Should be one in here on, there it is, 7540.06, district email, staff email, and 7540.07 is student email. There's slightly different in that there were some more restrictions.
You have a question?
Yes?
I'm questioning revisions to policy 7540.06, electronic mail. The very last sentence on the last page reads, "Staff and board members using the district's email system shall satisfactorily complete training pursuant to policy 7540 regarding the proper use and retention of email." Does that mean that we should receive training other than what we talk about at board meetings? Because I don't recall that we ever did have any specific training. Do you, Joe?
Yeah, we, actually, when we first rolled things out, and when new board members come on, we basically tell them, don't delete anything. Because everything actually is preserved by the system.
Right.
And even if you go and you delete it, it's really not deleted. So do we really receive the training? No. Has it been mentioned? Yeah. But, I think we should probably have periodic times where we talk about things like open records. This is tied to open records requests, and, that's where the retention comes in. So, yeah, I think there might have been one board workshop once, many
Maybe.
moons
There
ago.
was, yeah.
That was
But,
like a decade
if it's in
ago.
here,
I guess my question is part of the issuance of an email address and an iPad, did you have to sign the acceptable use policy?
I never did.
I don't remember
I
doing
don't
that.
remember.
Check on that, Lynn, because in the acceptable use policy, there is
I
the
don't remember.
common sense information that we provide staff on appropriate use of email and technologies. So that would be, if you haven't been provided that, I'm gonna, Lynn is making a note of it right now, and I'll talk to Todd and Steve. It is a electronic or paper form that outlines what the limitations are and what you should be doing with technology. And then that would be the training. There was a question a month ago about the question about deleting emails and the storage. And we asked Steve that question, and he said Google storage is calculated by user, not by the organization. So if they filled up their quota, it would only affect them. So an individual person, it would only impact them. However, Google currently provides unlimited storage for educational purposes. So it would be impossible to fill up an email inbox, a Google Drive, all of that information for educators right now is unlimited.
I also recall, or help me if I'm wrong, Joe and Bill, because you two have been here as long as I have. When we got our computers, I don't recall that we ever had any training. It was just an assumption that we knew how to use a computer.
Yeah,
And I didn't. I had to, have my son help me and learn on my own and read a lot, and, not everybody does. We just assume because we all have telephones, but there was a time when people had to learn how to use the telephone, and I would think that that may be true with computers.
I went in and sat down with one of the staff, and they walked me through some of the stuff.
But that you did that, but we didn't get that as a whole.
They didn't tell me to go away.
I think when it,
No, of course
I
not.
think though, when it does come out to training, perhaps we could just, maybe Joe, you and I could talk and come up with a list of things that perhaps the board feels as a whole you would like some training on. And through a variety of vehicles. I mean, Steve Schloman could come in and give a tutorial on how to use the iPad.
That'd be great.
We could talk about acceptable use. It probably would be done in a workshop format. We also could maybe tap into, Gary and Alana to talk about some of the bigger records retention, walking quorum, just some of the things that boards need to be mindful of, open meeting laws, the exceptions to open meeting.
And from time to time, we've talked on that, Joe. What are those topics? We started to collect some of those, and I think it's time.
I think it's time to.
Yeah.
I mean, especially if we've got it in policy.
We'll
talk
try and
about that.
figure out what the timing is
Okay.
on that and
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
what that covers.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay, 75, 40, 06, 07, and 8605, electronic wireless communication devices by district. Oh, that was the highway one. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that we had a first reading on, and there's been no changes to them, so we just leave it that way and take them up for final reading, final approval in May. Okay, we have no information items. Other business. Anybody have any other recommendations for any policy issues? Joe, do you have anything coming?
I do not. Lynn and I just briefly discussed if, in the next 2 months, if the continuity of operations policy does get passed, we would, like I said, we begin scheduling some time now to work on that.
Which one, I'm sorry?
The continuity of operations.
yes.
In June and July, so that we could have something presentable to the board August, September. Knowing that it's disaster planning, I would just preface it with, you're not gonna think of everything that could possibly go wrong. However, you need to have a plan that's general enough to address all of the needs from an event.
Will it have a designated survivor?
No, I
Have you seen that show?
have seen it, I have seen it. It does though.
No, I haven't.
But, the times dictate that you think differently about safety.
Yep.
It's doesn't seem like there is any forum that is off limits anymore to potential violence. So, you just have to create a plan in the event that it happens.
I know,
With that, we stand adjourned.
okay. Joe, I recently got, and we all did,